Each of us lives within the matrix of story. We have the story that we tell ourselves as to what it is that we are attempting to accomplish. And at the same time, this exists within the matrix of a society or cultural story within which our story seeks to create some level of balance and interaction in a way that we're going to continue to grow through that process. It doesn't always pan out that societal's story and our story are on the same wavelength. Boy, even as I say that, there's an errant quality in that. Why is the societal story that we live in sometimes seemingly so errant to what it is that we perceive as the potential unfolding of our life dance? This week, I participated in is it a podcast? Something a little bit more than a podcast, a presentation with Michael Meade. To attempt to pigeonhole or contain a version of what transpires in any of Michael Meade's mythological, poetic, storytelling processes, I think would curtail the capacity for versions of the development of a new story, a new archetypal version of what it is that we, as soul spirit beings, have come to birth as opportunity here on planet Earth at this time. You know, I each week looking at the planetary dance and what stands out for me in particular. In a way, it might stand out for you as well, because we each always have the invitation to sit with the planetary conversation that's going on all the time and see if there might be a response from us, or, you know, even if it's minor, some level of recognition, some inkling of awakening that that larger planetary conversation that's transpiring is inviting us to participate with. From our version here, scurrying around on the surface of the planet Earth, interchanging our considerations with others. One of the poignant matters or factors that surfaced in the exchange of energy as Michael was weaving or unweaving the possibility of the storyline that we live in currently. There are those whose version of what it is that we as humanity are headed toward has a rather terminal quality to it. This is extremely short-sighted. This wasn't necessarily something that Michael brought up at this point, but it's something that has surfaced multiple times throughout creation, where the scales of life, that potential for harmony and balance, to paint a picture where one aspect is somehow weighing down more than the opposite aspect. And at this time, well, let me just look at the two aspects. One is forever on the equation that everything goes on, everything changes in this going on process. Other side of the equation, how many times along the trajectory of humanity have there been inclinations or indications that continuing in the direction that we are going in appears as though we're heading toward the edge of the cliff to jump off, as in some form or another a terminal or end scenario is so prevalent. And yet, no matter how many times this has occurred, we're still here. What transpired that altered those seeming potentials back along the way? Change. One of the only constants in this life dance that we can count on. Something changed, and we're no longer driven toward that cliff edge because perhaps a light came on and we could see that the path that we were on in the so-called collective story was extremely limiting, did not really contain the potential larger vision of what spirit and soul have offered each of us as gifts to share with one another in a very different trajectory. When I incarnated, I made the choice that I was going to take on the archetypal dance of an Aquarius. I have 4 planets in Aquarius, if you include the sun and the moon as planets. My rising sign is Aquarius. So things that happen that inspire, challenge, bring things up in unique fashion along this Aquarian trajectory get my attention. The one this week that I'm going to allow to surface is Pluto. It isn't necessarily the easiest or the most comfortable planetary signature that one is maybe inclined to have leap forward in front of you and say, pay attention to me. That's not generally how Pluto works. Lord of the underworld. It's like, why would I be inclined to want to wander into the realms of the underworld? What is there that beckons a version of this life exchange energy that says, I need to pay attention to this? Well, for me, Pluto currently is dancing right there between my sun and moon. I have the moon at 2 degrees Aquarius. I have the sun at 8 degrees Aquarius. And it's going to be between these two luminaries for a while. Other factors that Pluto signifies: mystery, secrets, intimacy, the discovery of hidden versions of this life dance that Pluto's function is to bring to light or expose up from the underworld zone where things have been hidden from us, or just as easily that hidden zone where things that we are not comfortable with are pushed down into to deal with later, or perhaps not deal with at all because the version of our life story process just can't handle them at this time. That's one option. To be awake enough to be able to, step over the lines of taboo. The secretive side of human interaction that doesn't happen out there in front of the world, but the intimate exchange of energy between each of us within these, misty, cloudy, not necessarily so overtly upfront arenas where we exchange considerations with one another that are challenging. They open up versions of interactive capacity between us that in some cultural storylines are said that you should not go there. And yet, can I use the word willingness here to step into taboo land with a open enough heart to recognize that exchange of energy, potential between us, often in the attempt to be contained within strict regulations and rules, can you sense the curtailment of a level of awareness that would be kept from us in the growth experience by an unwillingness to step across that rule restricted line and share something so intimate and personal with someone else that our soul essence is right there on the surface in a place where the heart capacities that we each have brought to awaken within each other are going to go into territory that others have said, don't go there. And yet there are mysterious secrets sitting right there in those close interpersonal spaces that can't be birthed any other way. Part of the reason for this Plutonic deep dive consideration is that this week, on Thursday, Pluto is going to do its annual retrograde. And it will be retrograde until mid-October. It'll go all the way back to 3 degrees of Aquarius, before turning direct. And, it really doesn't do justice to Plutonic movement, because Pluto's really, really, really slow. And when you consider the signature of the planets that move really slow, like our Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, part of the intensity, is a good Scorpio term, and Plutonic consideration, has time to, gestate in a particular part of the zodiac over a rather lengthy time frame, building substance, turning over layers of awareness. And we're talking Pluto here. Where is the Plutonic layers of consideration? It's in the deep, potentially underworld zone. That scorpionic interactive capacity that doesn't generally just spring to the surface when engaging with another, but takes patience, time to develop a sense of safety and security, wherein honesty is going to be allowed to move in realms that generally culture, our societal structure, often doesn't want us to participate in. And the reason why is because any attempt of control of that kind of energy is going to flop. Because the awakening potential that exists there comes from such a deep and profound zone of spiritual connection to all of life. And when you step across that line out of the cultural storyline, opportunity awakens in ways that the cultural version cannot contain. Something that is considered taboo. Why is it considered taboo? That's a rabbit hole. Whoever made that determination that the potential level of intimacy one with another could extend beyond a line where it slipped into the taboo zone was a recognition that there's something possibly magical transpiring when we can extend ourselves beyond the parameters of what is considered appropriate to awaken an aspect in ourselves that wouldn't happen any other way, that is Plutonic, that is Scorpionic, that it just isn't an accepted form of creative space. And yet it is creative space. Pluto going retrograde on Thursday this week. Pluto, when it's in forward motion, has the, what shall we call it? I was going to say responsibility, and in a way it is, but it has a function to bring forth versions of stuff that has been hidden from us into the light of day. Might that include something that is taboo? Yeah. When it goes retrograde, it's pulling back those opportunities in such fashion that they don't necessarily disappear, but the taboo side, particularly from the cultural collective version, becomes a little bit more challenging to bring up. Because Pluto is, essentially bouncing back and forth between my solar vitality and my lunar reflective shadow side, this realm is closer to the surface, and anybody in any of the fixed signs, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, who has planets in those earlier degrees, this plutonic energy it's tickling you. It's causing you to wonder at a very deep and profound level about subject matter that you have to be in the appropriate company with others in order to bring up. As we go into this week, I'm still on Sunday, I'm sorry, things that move. The moon is out of bounds. The moon went out of bounds on Sunday. And the moon being out of bounds is as it's going through the Sagittarian archetype. It's out of bounds in the south. Wait a second. Isn't that north? No. Capricorn is south. Cancer is north in the larger scenario of how things are laid out. But currently, in the 2020s, the moon, every time it passes through the Sagittarius Capricorn area, it goes out of bounds. Every 2 weeks, every month. The opposite, every 2 weeks, as it's moving between Gemini and Leo, it goes out of bounds in the north. And when a planet is out of bounds, the archetypal leaning of that particular planetary energy says, I really don't care too much about the dictates of what it is that are the rules that say you need to stay within the parameters of these lines. But when a planet is out of bounds, it says, it's almost like I'm getting a breath of fresh air. And the reason I'm getting this breath of fresh air is that the dictates of the rules and regulations that try to contain things, they just don't quite grab us in quite the same fashion. It's like, you've been released, experiment with life. Do a Uranian investigation that wants to shake things up a little bit. The moon, how do you feel? That feminine quality of tuning into what does it mean to be receptive of energy? what kind of energies when the moon is out of bounds every 2 weeks are right there on the surface asking us, participate, feel more, dive into an experience that could awaken you into something that you didn't even necessarily know was there. You can almost sense that at some level, we'll go back to our Plutonic. Do I want to, tickle the edges of a tabooness? It's there. Moon right now. It's in Sagittarius. Sagittarius has no limits. Unlimited direction that you want to be pulled toward. You're drawn toward. Can you feel that? Possibilities that, you may not have thought before, but they've been trying to pull you up, saying, step up to the next level. Step up to the next one. And keep going. That is how Sagittarius works. That's where the feelings are as we begin this week. As we get to the 5th, Tuesday, a Mars day, believe it or not, I'm going to talk about Venus. This is Venus's declination. See these ones that are in the slight pinkish color? That means they're out of bounds. Venus goes out of bounds on Tuesday. It'll be out of bounds until the 6th of June. So who is Venus? In the normal scenario, Venus is the ruler of Taurus and Libra, the two signs. It has to do with, from a Taurian perspective, valuation of things, which, if you transpose that over to the Libra version of Venus, it's what is the value of that interactive capacity between me and another. Venus also can be artistic expression. There's a level of appreciation that, if you think about it along the artistic terms, different people are going to appreciate different things. Even in the same presentation of a piece of art, in the eye of the beholder. Well, Venus is going to go out of bounds while in Gemini, the land of curiosity. I think of the phrase, I might be coming from Alice in Wonderland, curiouser and curiouser I get. Curious and curiosity are the realm of Gemini. Almost a certain restlessness can appear when Gemini is being considered because things are staying the same. And from a Gemini perspective, I need different input. If I'm being fed the same meal over and over and over again, I'm going to get tired of it. And my curiosity said, what else is there? Well, we're talking Venus here, going out of bounds, Remember, stepping beyond that limit of what rules and regulations say is appropriate. And it's Venus. How is my value structure able to stretch? How is my understanding of artistic expression going to, take on a potential Uranian kind of consideration that you cannot predict? How is my experience of interacting with others going to say, who else might I be interested in sharing my considerations with, Gemini, in a verbal context that we will be able to, push the limits of what it is that's potential in ways that perhaps others may not be ready to do. But somehow, this out of bounds Venus, at the same time anticipating that Pluto's about to, go retrograde for a long cycle. There's a potential deep dive sitting here in this week that the invitation into experiences we haven't experienced yet are right there at the edge of reality, asking us if we want to participate in this. I'm going to go back to one of the considerations from the Michael Meade workshop this week. We considered Armageddon. Now, some people's version of this leans so heavily and dynamically into the end of things, whereas the reality is some things actually have to end in order for there to be space available for what's next. And there always is a what's next sitting there awaiting our awakening to it in a way that it can transpire. And how it will transpire, we don't know. You're not supposed to know. But the process of moving away from, here's our Venus going out of bounds in Gemini, from a steady diet of the same thing into new, possibly more savory flavors of the experience of life that are just been waiting for us to step across that threshold into a new version of a human story, and one of the visions I got when we were working with Michael this week was a contingent, the size is not really that relevant, but a contingent of beings taking the version of the old dictated story and stitching together a matrix of energy along the whole perimeter of that old storyline, versions of something new and different that is right there waiting for us to awaken into it. And this stitching is not something that you can predetermine. Because if the term predetermine often indicates I'm going through my memory banks of what has existed so far and trying to pull up from it versions of what got us to where we are and see that as how I could reuse it in a fashion to develop something new. But no! That is not where newness comes from. You have to let go, remove, extricate yourself from where you have come from in order for the newness to discover you as a participant in an awakening process that has not happened before. That's what's transpiring right now. You know, there are versions of the magical experience of living that we haven't been cognizant of, haven't been allowed to understand as potential versions of why we are here on the earth at this time. That the cultural matrix story will not allow us to discover. As we get to the end of the week, Saturday, almost the end of the week, we come into the waning lunar square to the sun. Crisis in consciousness. For me, you know, it's all I really can draw on with some sense of authority. This happens at 19 degrees of Aquarius. I have my Mars and my Mercury 8 minutes apart at 18 degrees 50 some minutes of Aquarius. This crisis in consciousness is tickling my Mars, a driving energy that wants to, in Mercury fashion, say something. And perhaps that has influenced what it is that has, trailed off my tongue in today's consideration. And I would just have to invite you into my world in this moment as an astrologer to give you this version of the astrological dance, which each of us astrologers has versions of this and are going to tune into this celestial dance in ways that resonate with us, and each of you, astrologers or not, has to make the query. Does this or does this not resonate with an aspect of myself? And if so, what is the next step? If not, I'm going to take a step in a different direction, and that is just fine. Actually, it's appropriate. We each have to find that version of the storyline that we are living that is going to awaken the new version of our story that we can share with one another. And here, on Sunday, my rising degree is 28 degrees of Aquarius. Here's the moon starting out this day at, you guessed it, 28 degrees of Aquarius. You might say that I feel a pretty dynamic level of energy, excitement to what is transpiring right now. But that's just my perspective, and I invite you in your particular way to tune in just the way you need to do this dance. Well, I think that's about all I'm going to offer for everybody for this week. There are different ways to follow this bouncing ball that I have spun for you today. I welcome your version of it, because each of us is going to have a unique version that our spirit and soul came to grow, enhance, and fill out in the way that only we can do this. And that is vital for each and every one of us to be able to share at a truly deep interpersonal level with one another in this awakening process. Thank you. Have an interesting week.